Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. Nurses of Reddit. What's the most bizarre thing you've encountered while working the graveyard shift? Please remember to like, share,
and subscribe!
and subscribe.
One elderly lady escaped and walked to a police station at 3 a.m. in torrential rain. It was 3 miles away and she suffered a lot of falls, etc. Covered in blood by the time she arrived. Asked to report a murder. She reported a nurse for murdering all her patients. Turned out the nurse had refused to give her a cigarette, and this was her way of getting her back. Didn't happen to me, but someone I work with, elderly care. She found one of our dementia patients, who was barely able to walk, mind you, standing in her dark room, scraping the wall with a spoon. When asked why, she was convinced her husband was stuck in the wall, and she tried to dig him out. Said husband never lived with us and passed away years ago. One situation that actually happened to me was another resident, convinced I spoke French to her. She would always come up to me, and only me, and be like, "We're French people, and we can talk in private." When asked, she said she couldn't speak French, and neither can I. I once cared for a woman experiencing psychosis, a very smart and kind lady who was temporarily not in reality. She had disrobed, and I was trying to get her dressed. Before I could react, she removed her tampon from her vagina and attempted to eat it. I wrestled the tampon away from her. I came in one night to find my charge nurse standing by the elevator, having a very clear and distinct back and forth conversation with somebody inside. And apparently the elevator was stuck and somebody was in there, and everyone was trying to figure out who to call or what button to push to fix the problem. Eventually, it's decided that we'll call the maintenance guy, and so the charge nurse turned around to go call them. And when she did, the elevator doors opened behind her, and the fucking thing was empty. Was working in a child and adolescent psych facility. While the doors technically locked, where I live has strict legal regulations around locked facilities and emergency release. There was an emergency release on all doors accessing the building, where if you held the bar down for a certain number of seconds, the locks released. My first solo night shift, the entire unit, about a dozen or so kids, coordinated to release all the doors at the same time during separate activities. This split the staff. The entire unit escaped. Kids were running through yards, down the highway, in a nearby parking lot. I'd gotten one in a security hold and had to wait for EMS to transport. Police were chasing the ones on the highway. Staff gathered the rest. Nobody was hurt, and everyone was back in time for med pass. I was known for being generous with chats and water and juice. A couple of those kids learned that night that if you make me chase you through multiple lots and wait an hour for EMS while I have to hold you, you are absolutely unequivocally not getting chats and juice. Took me 4 hours to document it all. I'm a physician, but was on graveyard shift in the ICU during the dark days of COVID, and I left for a few minutes to handle a patient off the ward. When I came back, the nurses looked like they'd seen a ghost. One of the books on the crash cart had apparently flown off horizontally with force, like 6 feet across the hallway. No one was near it, and it wasn't placed in some sort of precarious position to fall over. The nurse described it as though some invisible thread had pulled it straight off the shelf. Then, nearly immediately after, one of our patients, who'd been hanging on by a thread, passed away. Was DNR, so no action needed. To this day, I consider it related, like he was causing shenanigans on the way out. The Black Dog Visitations, Hospice Unit Night Shift. When patients reported getting a visit from a large, friendly black dog, we'd pass the sighting to the incoming day shift. Inevitably, death followed soon. To be clear, we didn't have any therapy pets at night. Even though it was a hospice ward, some patients were just there for respite care, and many were there to get symptoms under control before they returned home. so the patients who told us about the dog obviously were conscious and not actively dying. Not a nurse, but a patient here. I had a quadruple bypass, and when I came through, I had a case of pump brain. That is the first time I've ever experienced some sort of psychosis. I was convinced that they tricked me into going to the hospital, and they were never going to allow me to leave. They took all of my forms of communication away from me, except for an iPad because I kept trying to escape. During graveyard shift one night, I installed Uber on my iPad and booked a ride out of the hospital. Turns out they pay attention. They wouldn't let me escape. My brain started working again a couple of days later, and it took me a long time to even have any memories of what happened when I was having my episode. That's some freaky stuff, dude.
Do you guys have a preference? I'm assuming most of us are probably 9-to-5ers or 8-to-4s or 10-to-6s or anything, but I like working overnights. I don't do it as much anymore, but it happens once in a while. So what shift do you prefer? First, second, third shift? Let's hear it. That's Lila, by the way. Off to school.
As told to me by the nurses working with my dad, let me preface this with my dad was an EMT, first responder, so he would always step up to help when needed. Combine that with the fact that he was in the hospital for a bad infection on a high dose of meds, and the fact that the last thing he watched on TV was the anniversary of the synagogue shooting in PGH, and that the person in the room next to him had Alzheimer's, and this guy would shout, "Help, they're killing me," all day long. So I guess my dad woke up, heard the screams for help, and got out of bed and went to this guy's room. Somehow, he grabbed a pair of scissors from the nurse's desk on the way. For some reason, he thought all the hospital staff that ran into the room were trying to hurt the screaming guy, and my dad was defending him with the scissors. So, when he told the security guard he will make sure he can never have kids if he takes one more step, he was tased. Yes, my 79-year-old dad, at the time father, was tased in the hospital. The aftermath? Wow. We got to know the entire board at the hospital, with the president stopping in every day to see how things were. My dad was back to normal the next day. It was determined to be a combo of what I wrote up above. He has security outside his door the rest of the week that he was there. No, we did not sue the hospital. They tried for over an hour to get him to give it up, I guess. They had to give the security guard time off because he was a wreck. 21, first day on the job. He came to see my dad to apologize and was shaking and crying. The whole thing was a mess. Was on my 2-hour break. Had a sudden panicky feeling about 1.5 hours into the break. I felt an intense urge to go back to my unit immediately. The moment I stepped onto the unit, my patient had fallen to the floor while the nurse who was covering for me was assisting him to the bathroom. He died within a minute or two, likely a heart attack or something similar. He was not full code, so there wasn't much to do but hold him as he passed. One night I was on the night shift in a very old former TB hospital that was in the process of being shut down. Half of the wards were closed, and the one I was in at the Osire end of the hospital from the others. It was, as TB hospitals of that era were, located in a large wooded area within the city, so it was always very eerily quiet. We were having issues with needing some additional pillows and an additional mattress, so one of the nurses asked me to go with her to Ward 17, which was closed, halfway along the corridor between where we were and the rest of the main hospital was. She didn't want to go along as it was understandably creepy at night. We went to this closed ward and opened it up again and went about trying to find bits and bobs we needed to take, and a door slammed out of nowhere on the other side of the ward, causing us to shit ourselves. After being a bit freaked out, we tried to laugh it off a bit and then carried on. Then lights started turning on and off on their own, and then patient buzzes started going off in the empty beds and desk. We immediately noped out of there with armfuls of pillows, ignoring the mattresses we needed and decided to have staff go do it on the day shift later when there was daylight, which wouldn't be until like 10 a.m. Caregiver, not quite a nurse, but had a guy in the group home I used to work in stalk me through the house all night. There were, for some reason, no actually lockable doors in the whole house, which I discovered by having to lean against the bathroom door as he eerily muttering things, including calling out that he loved me. After that, occasionally he'd wake up and come downstairs to hover right outside the door out of sight and say weird, creepy shit about not liking other workers. Nicknamed him Freddy Fazbear after that one. Not a nurse, but a patient. My husband brought me in because I was short of breath, low blood pressure, episodes of tachycardia, had stomach pains, and couldn't stop shaking. I was so scared. I didn't know what was happening to me. The ER was packed. They put me in a tiny room with 2 beds and a curtain between them. I had been there for about half an hour when they brought in a very drunk Native American man with burns on his legs. He's incoherent and muttering and shouting. I'm softly crying because I was scared. My father had recently undergone treatment for esophageal cancer, so of course my mind went there. Then, that incoherent raving drunk man beside me started singing in a very clear, soft voice a traditional song. It was so beautiful it calmed me. Everything I had been feeling and thinking just dissolved with that song. I was released not long after. Turns out, that was my handshake introduction to GERD. I cared for an elderly lady with dementia. She always thought there was a man in her room, and every time she started crying out for help, a member of staff would go in and check the room out for her. We would open the doors to her bathroom, check the cupboards and dresser, anywhere that someone could hide. She starts screaming for help one night, and a nurse goes in, checks the cupboards, bathroom, nothing. The nurse does one final check under the bed, and there's a man under there. The nurse also starts screaming, and more staff run in. Somehow, a homeless man who was drunk and on drugs managed to fit through the tiny window into her room and decided to take a nap under her bed. The staff that used to laugh off claims of a man in her room didn't find it quite so funny anymore. Before I was an RN, I started as a nurse aide at a nursing home. I was helping a patient to bed at night who was legally blind, could see colors and outlines but not details, and was one side amputee but was alert and oriented besides that. When I helped her transfer her to the bed, she sat there for a second and looked very confused. I asked her what was wrong, and she asked why there was a lady with red hair in her roommate's wheelchair. The room was divided by a curtain, but where we parked the wheelchairs was behind me by the room's entrance. I'm not kidding. The hairs in the back of my neck went up, and I didn't believe in the paranormal back then. I asked her what she meant, and she repeated the same thing again and said the lady had her head down like she was sad. I'll never forget how freaked out I was. That place had so many weird things happen, they actually called in a priest to bless it room by room when they began remodeling. Safe to say, I believe in the paranormal now. I used to work the night shift in a semi-independent care facility. We had one man who could literally not walk unless using his walker. I'd never interacted with him in the first 3 months I worked there. There was always 2 of us, and we split our patients so we could keep consistency. Anyway, one night for some reason I had to go give him his nighttime meds. Normally we give them to the patient one by one. This man had to take 6 pills on a night, so I had them all in my hand, ready to give them to when he snatches the lot. I was so shocked that honestly time slowed down as I was watching this happen. He had super long nails, which had feces in them all the time. Ugh. Well, I must have had an expression on my face he didn't like, and he absolutely exploded and started screaming at me. As I was walking out the door, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye, and this dude comes flying at me so fast. He chased me down the length of the corridor until I reached the staff room, which could be locked. He stood there for an hour with just his vest on, scraping shit out of his ass and wiping it everywhere. I tried getting my colleague on the walkies, but she couldn't understand what I was saying, as I was gagging. But as soon as I said her name, and what the patient was doing, he flew back into his room and acted like nothing happened. I went for my shift the next night and got pulled into the manager's office. He told her that I was saying crude things about him and telling people lies about him chasing me without his walker and smearing shit on the doors, which he said that I must have done because I never liked him. So she obviously didn't believe me until I made her put on the security from the night before. I've never seen someone lose so much color from their face that fast. Apparently, this man was a relative of hers, so she never took any bad information about him seriously and blamed us for being disrespectful. So we got the big boss involved. 15 people came forward with similar stories and found out she'd been destroying all of his complaint forms. She got fired and he got kicked out of our facility. They don't stand for abuse, whether it's from patients, family, or workers. But holy hell, that dude could run. He looked exactly like Danny DeVito as Penguin. I nearly cried when I found out he has to leave, as I literally had my resignation in my hand, ready to give to Big Boss. Early on as a nurse, I came in for night shift and was assigned a patient on hospice or comfort measures that was likely to pass that night. He was no longer speaking or awake or responsive, but was surrounded by family. After assessing him and speaking with family, I felt they weren't entirely grasping what was coming, so I asked the chaplain to come by. After the chaplain had been in for a few minutes, I checked to see if anyone needed anything. It was just as the chaplain asked if they wanted to pray together. They did, and I, not a religious person, thought it would be too distracting if I left, so I stayed. The chaplain prayed, and just as he finished off within the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, the patient took a long, deep breath, let it out, and died. Cue my awkward peeping over the slowly making my way to check for a heart rate and confirming, yes, he was actually gone. Wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't been there myself. Still, it reaffirmed what I'd been taught. Hearing is the last sense to go. OMG, here's one for you all. It's about 0300 and a nurse aide and I are checking on this 95-pound lady with dementia. Her dementia was such that she could be her first name, middle, or last name, and if she was one, she was not the other. We entered the room on either side of her bed, and I shit you not, she did a perfect sit-up, arms at her sides, looks up at us and says, "We are going to kill you." I looked at her and looks at us and says, "Janet, fake name, you can do anything you want, as long as your head doesn't spin and the bed doesn't rise." She turns to me, tilts her head to one side and says, "Okay," and lays back down just as stiff when she sat up. I looked at the aide and told them we were out of there. I used to do rounds for a hospital checking vaccine freezers at night and outlying clinics to ensure they were functioning and that the vaccines wouldn't be destroyed. At one clinic at about 0200, a hard-working physician's assistant was the only person there. When I entered the clinic and she saw me, she expressed relief that she wouldn't have to be there alone because odd things happen there at night. I didn't think much of it. A few weeks later, I was checking the same clinic at about the same time when a chair rolled forcefully from an office about 30 feet down a hallway. I was a bit freaked out. I spent 30 minutes checking every room of the small clinic and couldn't find anyone. I checked all the doors, and they were locked. The door I had entered through and locked behind me was locked. I worked a stint in long-term care. We had an old man who was a Vietnam veteran and had some pretty severe mental issues. Basically would just repeat phrases over and over. So like if Judge Judy was on TV, he might just say, "Judgment for the plaintiff, judgment for the plaintiff," and get hung up on that for a few days. And if you ask him how he's doing or what he wants to eat or anything, he responds, "I don't know and I don't care. Judgment for the plaintiff." Truly the lights were on, but no one was home. Anyway, I was working midnight to 8 a.m. one night, and I shit you not, it happened to be Halloween. and this man starts screaming the name of another patient in that ward. I had one other person working in that area with me, and we looked at each other like, what the f... This man never acknowledged other patients or even conversed in a meaningful way at all. So why is he suddenly screaming out this other patient's name at 2 a.m.? Mind you, I normally worked days or evenings, so it was unusual for me to even be there that late. So we went and got him out of bed and brought him into the day room. The patient whose name he was hollering was fast asleep in another room, but he sat out there and told us about growing up, joining the service, and how incompetent he thought his doctors were. He was definitely a little off, but just talking to us in a semi-normal way and calling us by our names. I suggested to them that they try to just let him be awake overnight and sleep during the day all the time. Left shortly after that to work ICU, and I don't know whatever happened to the old man. I could write a book full of scary, interesting, sad, or dramatic stories, but this one is among the more bizarre and confusing ones. Not a nurse, just the daughter of one. She had two stories, one that happened to her and one that she made happen. The ICU was generally quiet, as in no patients were making noises because they were in comas or in heavily medicated sleeps, but one night, there was an old woman who was awake and so loud it was a miracle she didn't wake the dying around her. The whole night long, she just kept on crowing, "Henry," with the most god-awful rise on the second syllable. She was dying herself, but she used all her energy to spend her night screaming for Henry, who was, by the way, her deceased husband. Around dawn, she said, "Henry, I'm coming for you," and promptly died. My mom never encountered something like this again. Now, the one mom made bizarre. The night Top Gun premiered on TV for the first time, she was stuck working the night shift again. She didn't want to miss a minute of it, nor did her coworkers. What they decided to do was take every TV in the ICU and turn them to Top Gun, so no matter where they were in their rounds, they could see or hear the movie. It wasn't like their patients could wake up and complain. According to her, the department that night sounded like an airport. Bizarre isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's funny. I used to work in a hospital pharmacy specifically. During my tenure, there was an old wing of the hospital that used to be much more populated when I was a kid, and having been left deactivated for some time, the hospital stocked saline and potassium IV bags, which were stored in the med station just in the event they needed to reopen it. Med station was at the back of the unit and the nurses' station was in the middle. After having checked some expiration dates, I make my way past the nurses' station about midway, where there is a patient call phone still wired in. As I am walking past the nurses' station, one of the lights indicating a patient is calling lights up. Since this was around COVID, I thought that they were getting ready to open this particular wing of the floor and were just testing the phone system. Boy, was I wrong. As soon as I turn to face the room, the call is originating from I see a black silhouette dart across the doorway, and the call light on the phone turns off. My reaction was pretty much, cool, but secretly I was clenching my cheeks. So I get down to the pharmacy and ask our pool of nighttime pharmacists if the hospital is getting ready to open that wing of the hospital, which got one of the pharmacists curious. When prompted as to why I had asked the question, I recounted the experience, and my pharmacist said, "Sounds like you met so-and-so." A patient who was rumored to be a mother who passed away due to complications in the early 80s, who used to play pranks on the staff. After that night, I never returned to that end of the hospital as COVID was ramping down, and the pharmacy pulled the stock from that end of the hospital.